The noise of the town reached his ears before Brent arrived. People were yelling as they gathered around a platform with a woman standing on it. A long rope stretched from her to the tree. Brent tensed as he approached the mob. By the sounds of their voices, he knew that these people were irrational and angry. The woman pleaded with the crowd, but none could hear her words above the furor which drove them beyond their moral senses. Welcome to Mythical Phylogeny Adventures. I'm your guide, Jason. Today, we turn our attention to a dark part of history, the witch hunts. Let's look at the brutal events in history and how they would work in a fantasy world. Before we can talk about the witch hunts, we need to know what a witch is. I will be doing a deep dive into the witches for Halloween this year. Check that out in a few days. For most people, the idea of a witch is a woman using magic. This idea dates back clear to ancient Greece and Egypt, and is found worldwide. The reason we know so much about the European witch hunts was because of how well they documented their history. There was the witch of Endor from the Bible, who helped King Saul to defeat the Philistines in conflict. She also prophesied Saul and his son's death. And of course, the verse from Exodus, "Thou shalt not suffer a witch to live." There are even references to witches in the Code of Hammurabi. In ancient times, a witch was a wise woman, someone using natural herbs to produce medicines. But at times, these medicines were deadly and had side effects. This led to the crime of pharmaca in Greece. There are several records of murder using drugs and poison. Basically, a malpractice lawsuit of today. Much was born from the pagan beliefs in European witch lore. Most accounts of witchcraft speak of using curses and spells to influence others, both positively and negatively. Divination and soothsaying, with other accounts speak of shapeshifting. In time, they became associated with the devil, gaining their powers through contracts. The oldest potential recorded European witch hunt was about 338 BC in Greece, where Theoris of Lemnos and her children were put to death for using harmful drugs and curses. In Rome, there were the 12 Tables, a set of laws which included proper punishment for using curses and spells. Beneficium is the Latin word which roughly translates to cursing or poisoning. In 331 BC, a plague struck Rome, and 170 women were executed for Beneficium. And between 184 and 180 BC, Rome put to death another 5,000 people. There were even periods where books containing spells were outlawed and destroyed. There are most accounts coming from other points in history, even a few periods where witch hunts were banned, including the Council of Paderborn of 785 AD, which outlawed condemning and executing people of witchcraft, and the Canon Episcopi of the 10th century, which said there was no such thing as witchcraft, and that the teaching of it was heresy. And King Koloman of Hungary banned it in 1100 AD. In 1486, a book was published called Malleus Maleficarum, the Hammer of the Witches. It dictates all the information of the time regarding witches and identification. Some claim that this book is what spurred forth the witch hunt mania. 80% of those executed for witchcraft were women, but in some nations it was mostly men, such as Iceland at 92% male. same demographic appeared in Normandy, Estonia, and Moscow. Witch hunts were often used as a form of political maneuvering, namely the execution of Joan of Arc. She was tried and burned at the stake under the pretense of being a witch and a heretic, though the witch accusations were acquitted posthumously. Probably the most infamous witch hunt was that of Salem, of 1692 to 1693. Prior to the witch hunts, Salem had an extensive amount of tension from multiple ongoing issues. It started with the accusations from 4 girls: Betty Paris, age 9, Abigail Williams, age 11, Anne Putnam Jr., 12, and Elizabeth Hubbard, 17. The factors have some disagreement. The girls suffered physical ailments, convulsions, uncontrolled screaming, sickness, fever, and the like. Most speculate that the girls were fed poisonous mushrooms. The girls made accusations against several women in town. In total, 200 people were accused. 14 women and 5 men were executed. 1 died by torture, and 5 from diseases in the jail. In China's Han Dynasty, 91 BC, Emperor Wu sought to abolish other religions beside Confucianism. Among those were the Wu traditions of spiritualism. In Okinawa, Japan, the Yuta spirit mediums and Toki fortune tellers, they had been accused of cursing people and had periods of persecution. In 1580, the Philippines had a case of the ex-governor's wife and daughter being accused and put on trial for cursing people, but the witch hunts continued. In India, there were witch hunts starting in 1792, with over 2,000 accused witches in the last 20 years in India still, and it still continues to this day in parts of the Middle East and Africa. That is an abbreviated history of the witch hunts. As you can see, it is a varied history, much back and forth, and it goes back millennia, probably longer than you thought. But regardless, it was predictable who would be targeted as a witch. Usually, it was social outcasts, loners, and people who there were grudges against, vendettas. Truly, the witch hunts depict one of the worst sides of humanity. They were scapegoats to cover for plagues and misfortune. An apothecary whose medicine didn't work when the person is already too far gone to recover. A political rival who you need to discredit. Signs of being a witch are varied, but something like a birthmark, being single past a certain age, having an accent, having blue eyes in Africa, red hair, could all be used to label a person a witch. Any excuse could be made to justify someone was a witch. Often, it was used to label those who were considered heretical in their beliefs, defied what was considered proper behavior. A strange person living outside of town who peddles remedies. Then came the interrogations. Torture, starvation, isolation, imprisonment were all used. Many were tested under insane conditions. Throw the accused into the lake. If they sink, then they aren't a witch. But if they float, then they were a witch. Repeatedly dunked in a tank of water and held there to the brink of death. They were made to confess to things that they never did, to things that never happened, and encouraged to blame others, to make more accusations to save yourself. Corrupt and abusive. Finally, the punishment. Death for most. Usually it wasn't burning, but hanging was the more common. A few were convicted, but never executed. For them, their fate varied. Many would have their possessions seized. Many were ostracized and ended themselves. And their fate often spread to their families. But There were also records of punishment for false accusations, such as having your own property taken and given to the accused. The sad thing about the witch hunt is that it is a mob. People are angry and scared. Under these conditions, they will lash out at anyone. People will believe the lies told, choosing to blend in rather than risk being called out and facing accusations sent their way. And that is what makes it worse. To escape death, people willingly threw others onto the gallows and pyres. Tell me, adventurer, would you blame another as a witch and let them die if it saved your life? Most may say you would never, but judging by the records of the witch trials, most people would destroy another person to save their skin. Ultimately, what we have is an example of mob rule. Get a bunch of people all riled up and fixated on one thing, and then push them over the edge. Most witch hunts started when things were already putting people on edge. A plague, financial issues, political unrest, any of these have occurred at the start of a witch hunt. When people are on edge, they are easier to manipulate. That is when the witch hunts have begun. But there is an issue with all of this. These witch hunts occurred in our world, where there is no such thing as magic. But what about in a fantasy world? In a reality where magic is not a story, but a fact of life? That could change quite a lot. First off, we have curses and spells to handle. How common those are will depend on the setting. So, two versions: minimal magic and maximum magic. With minimal magic, magic is rare with very few people having access. Under these conditions, the world may be similar to ours on the surface. But our issue is in how magic becomes accessible. Most witch hunts focus on the witch gaining power from a contract with the devil, selling one's soul to an evil entity. That is the important part here. Evil. A devil's deal only benefits the devil, as they say. Possession of magic could definitely breed superstition and skepticism. Ostracization of those with magic, both good and evil, would be highly likely. People may keep the secrets of a magic user when it helps them, but suspicion will grow and secrets will leak. Eventually, a witch hunt may come up. Accusations will bring a real witch hunter, someone who may really know how to identify a witch. Now, whether they can truly identify a witch is going to be an issue. Are they foolproof? Some definitive evidence that is reliable most of the time. To make witch hunts reliable, you'll need that. Without that, you'll end up with witch hunts just like in our world. If they can identify a witch, we won't end up with a mass hysteria and unnecessary death tolls. Only those who pose a threat would be dealt with. A clean solution to a potentially devastating situation. We'll look at what it takes to be a witch hunter next week in more detail. With magic being a limited resource, it could lead to governments harboring witches and warlocks to gather military might. That could put them at odds with the witch hunters. But what happens if the witch hunters aren't reliable? Could a fraud arrive in town and accuse the local apothecary of being a witch? They could arrive in town, spread rumors, and incite a mob. These would be dangerous. A crooked individual with a smooth tongue has been the ruins of numerous cities and nations. If the witch hunters can't reliably identify a witch, then we could have witch hunts in that world, but only worse, because the fear of a witch is really warranted. But what about in a world with maximum magic? when magic is common and sold in every store. Things are quite different. Magic wouldn't be suspicious, but used daily, maybe even for the mundane. Under these conditions, discerning a malicious witch from an ordinary civilian becomes difficult, if not impossible. If the only difference is a witch has made a pact with the devil, then you need to discover the contract. That will be much more difficult. The witch hunters would need to be better trained, but the risk of a moral right decreases. But would witches be rejected in such a world? Well, it would depend on how the magic works. Turning to a devil to gain power could be viewed in multiple ways: a fool's errand, a desperate gamble, or a sign of weakness. Regarding how devils occur is a factor. Multiple devils and demons, or one. Find factions which you could ally with. Ultimately, when magic is more common, there will be less risk of witch hunts. But not all. Most likely, a certain school of magic may be listed as taboo, say necromancy, and a witch hunt could occur seeking out those who use the particular art. Under this condition, we could still get witch hunts. What school of magic may depend on different nations, and thus could lead to strife between nations, and witch hunters could be used to sow the discord and lead to a way to weaken each other. Once more, the witch hunts become a form of political manipulation. Regardless of the presence of magic, bringing a group of short-sighted and angry people together never bodes well. The woman screamed and begged, but no one in the crowd listened to her. But there was a pair of ears which heard them. Brent gripped his axe and rushed forward. The large man startled the crowd who thought him a demon, her patron. No, he was just an adventurer, and at that moment, a fool. His brash actions left the masses momentarily stunned, long enough for him to spring onto the stage and swing his axe. The sharp blade sliced the rope cleanly. He grabbed the accused woman's hand and dragged her out of the village. Behind them chased the witch hunter. His eyes remained on his prey. The witch hunts were brutal events that shaped many lives. They show the worst aspects of humans: lies, betrayal, trickery, abuse. And it seems likely that they would occur even in a fantasy world. Let's pray that you never find yourself under such accusations. Thank you for watching, adventurers. Please return next week, where we shall look at the witch hunters. Until then, I'll see you on the roads.